Overnight, satellite pictures started doing the rounds, and honestly, it looked like someone had taken a giant hole punch to the middle of Iran. One moment, the Isfahan centrifuge hall was right there, clear as day. The next, it was just a crater. Israeli and American planners are pretty confident that the site will never spin uranium again. So the real question isn't whether Iran's nuclear calendar just got absolutely shredded, it's whether the country has any realistic path left to even sniff a bomb. The first wave hit at 2:17 local time. Imagine this: stealth bombers launched from the Gulf, screaming through the night sky, then releasing bunker busters that punched right through 10 meters of reinforced concrete. 43 minutes later, cruise missiles, flying so low they practically clipped the treetops, took out the backup power lines. By dawn, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, was already picking up radiation alarms that just flatlined. The power to those critical centrifuge halls was completely gone. What made this strike truly unusual, though, was the sheer choreography of it all. Israeli F-35s handled the above-ground hangars, a precise dance of destruction. Meanwhile, a smaller American contingent operating with pinpoint accuracy targeted the underground enrichment halls, the very ones the Iranians believed were invisible, impregnable. And here's a crucial detail. The attackers deliberately left the spent fuel pond alone. Why? Because blowing it up would have scattered radioactive contamination across a city of 2 million people. This wasn't about spectacle or making a huge, messy statement. This was about precision, pure and simple. Look, Iran can replace pipes. They can replace wires. They can even replace scientists, albeit with some difficulty. But here's what they absolutely cannot replace, not in any realistic time frame: 3,600 IR-6 centrifuges that were just chopped into what one diplomat described as twisted knitting needles. These aren't just any centrifuges. These machines enrich uranium 25 times faster than their older, clunkier IR-1 counterparts. They were Iran's express lane, their shortest route to weapons-grade material. European diplomats who'd been briefed on the damage assessment told me the workshop floor now just looks like a pile of metallic spaghetti. Rebuilding this kind of capability isn't just about getting new machines. It would require specialized carbon fiber bellows, components that are under incredibly strict export control. And where was Tehran's existing stockpile of these crucial parts? You guessed it, sitting right there in that same now destroyed hall. The IAEA confirmed it. The site is destroyed, not damaged. That single stark sentence translates to roughly 2 years of zero enrichment growth, even if every sanction vanished tomorrow. It's a complete halt. The Iranians built Fordo inside a mountain for a very good reason. They thought it made it untouchable. U.S. planners once estimated it would need 2 sequential hits from the massive 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator, or MOP, just to crack the ceiling of that facility. Last night, they dropped 3. But they didn't just drop them, they staggered them, timing the impacts to create a devastating pressure wave that completely collapsed the internal blast doors. Now, satellite heat signatures show this tunnel's venting 24/7, which means they are no longer sealed, no longer capable of enrichment. Meanwhile, at Natanz, the surface complex took another hit, confirming its vulnerability, but the deeper, underground halls there managed to survive this time. The lesson here is clear, and it's a tough one for anyone trying to completely dismantle a program like this. No single strike can erase the whole thing. You don't need to, though. You just have to keep that nuclear timeline sliding right faster than Iranian engineers can claw it back. It's a constant race against time and ingenuity.
Israel has been playing this shadow game with Iranian facilities for years. We're talking Stuxnet cyberattacks, mysteriously exploding power supplies, even a quadcade of limpet mines attached to ships. And each time, Iran adapted. They air-gapped their computers, buried their wires even deeper, and duplicated critical sites to spread the risk. What finally broke that cycle, what changed the game entirely, was Washington's willingness to put U.S. tail numbers on this raid. By fusing American bunker busters, the heaviest, most effective penetrators out there, with Israel's unparalleled intelligence, the attackers married the one thing Tehran fears most, America's conventional military reach, with the one thing it cannot hide from, Mossad's human assets deep inside the country. The psychological impact of this combined assault is already glaringly visible. According to an opposition news site operating inside Iran, 3 senior nuclear scientists have asked for immediate family relocation in just the last 48 hours. When your brain trust, the minds behind your most prized program, starts requesting safe houses and exit visas, your program has much bigger problems than just a power outage. It signals a deep, unsettling fear. Western officials are quick to stress that none of the bombs landed directly on Iran's declared uranium stockpile. On the surface, that might sound like a failure, right? Like they missed the target. But that only sounds like a failure until you realize the stockpile itself was never the real break, never the ultimate bottleneck. The actual critical bottleneck is turning that raw uranium into bomb-grade material. And the bottleneck to that bottleneck, the choke point above all others, is centrifuges. Think of it like this. You own a massive lake of crude oil, but every single refinery in the country is on fire. Suddenly that lake of crude oil matters a whole lot less, doesn't it? Estimates vary, as they always do in these situations, but most non-proliferation experts now place Iran's breakout time, that frantic sprint to acquire 1 bomb's worth of highly enriched uranium, at roughly 12 months. That's double the pre-strike assessment. A year is an absolute political lifetime, especially in the volatile Middle East, and Tehran knows it. This setback is significant. Iran's usual answer to any kind of kinetic humiliation, any direct attack, is pretty predictable. Have Hezbollah or the Houthis fire off a few rockets, make some noise. But this time the playbook is completely stuck. Israel has spent the last 6 months systematically degrading those very same proxies. We're talking blowing up weapon depots in Syria, assassinating a key Hamas finance chief in Beirut, and intercepting crucial missile kits bound for Yemen. The result of the sustained campaign is that Iran's retaliation options are narrower, more limited than at any point since the 1979 revolution. They can still, of course, order militias to attack U.S. bases in Iraq. But here's the kicker. Each such attack now risks a second, even more devastating Israeli reprisal against what little remains of their nuclear program. Deterrence, which for so long was a Western worry, a strategic headache for Washington and Jerusalem, is now squarely Tehran's problem. The tables have turned.
Right from the start, Western planners modeled every single warhead trajectory with one critical goal in mind: to avoid hitting yellow cake storage or any active nuclear reactors. The intent was to smash enrichment capability, not to scatter dangerous isotopes across central Iran, potentially causing a regional environmental catastrophe. Of course, Russia and China still cried foul, immediately warning of another Chernobyl moment, trying to score political points. But the IAEA's airborne sniffer planes, flying over the region, have detected 0 gamma spikes above background levels. That careful, meticulous calibration matters immensely, because it completely robbed Iran of the moral high ground. When your opponent can level a key strategic site without poisoning a single schoolyard, it becomes exponentially harder to rally the victim of WMD narrative at the UN or on the global stage. The precision of the strike undercut Iran's ability to claim victimhood. Tehran really only has 3 primary levers left to pull, 3 options on the table. First, they could try to restart enrichment, but in smaller, much more dispersed and thus less efficient sites. The problem with that? It's slow and, crucially, it's observable. Second, they could attempt to weaponize their existing low-enriched stockpile covertly. But that path invites further, even more aggressive preemptive raids. And third, they could escalate regionally, hoping the world blinks first, hoping international pressure forces a ceasefire. But that risks dragging in the United States, which just proved, unequivocally, that it is willing to strike, and strike hard. Meanwhile, Israeli defense officials have told me quite explicitly that the next phase of Operation Rising Lion is already authorized if Iran even thinks about enriching above 60%. The translation is stark. The ceiling for Iranian enrichment has just been set, not by Tehran, but by someone else entirely. Within minutes of those first explosions, Brent crude prices spiked by $6 a barrel. But by lunchtime, it had already clawed back 4 of those dollars, once traders realized the Strait of Hormuz was still wide open and shipping lanes were unaffected. The real story here, though, is a long-term one. Any realistic prospect of Iranian barrels flooding the market under a revived nuclear deal is now gone for at least the next 2 years.
That gives Saudi Arabia plenty of room to comfortably keep prices in the mid-70s, which, conveniently, keeps Russia's war budget afloat. And perhaps most significantly, it removes a key incentive for Europe to re-engage Tehran diplomatically. Those sanctions that looked a little wobbly just last month, they've just fossilized. They're harder than ever to remove. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei convened an emergency session of the Supreme National Security Council, a clear sign of a deep crisis. State media aired only a still photo of the meeting, never a good sign of transparency or confidence. Two key members of the so-called nuclear triumvirate, the heads of the Defense Ministry Research Directorate and the Atomic Energy Organization, have not appeared in public since the strike. Rumors are swirling, and they're pretty credible, that President Raisi may sacrifice them. Why? To placate hardliners within the regime who are baying for blood but can't realistically get it from Washington or Jerusalem. Domestic backlash is still brewing, simmering beneath the surface. Expect arrests, almost certainly televised confessions, and a fresh, even more intense wave of cyber censorship inside Iran as the regime tries to control the narrative and suppress dissent. If these kinds of behind-the-headlines breakdowns help you make sense of our increasingly chaotic world, seriously hit subscribe and ring that bell. That way you won't miss the next update when, not if, the region flares up again. Almost simultaneously with the airstrikes, a nasty piece of wiper malware, dubbed Zora, hit Iran's customs network. Its purpose? To erase import logs for dual-use electronics, the very components needed for advanced centrifuge construction. Attribution here is murky, as it often is in cyber warfare, but the code itself includes strings in Farsi that specifically taunt the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Cyber sabotage used to be Israel's almost lone hobby, its unique specialty. Now Washington is more than happy to pile on, adding their own digital firepower. The practical effect of this is devastating. Even if Iran somehow manages to procure new centrifuge parts, they may never clear port inspection. When sanctions start to lose their bite, when they stop mattering as much, logistics, the movement of goods, suddenly becomes the new critical battlefield. It's a clever, insidious way to further cripple their efforts.
This operation, this precise, devastating strike, revealed just how thin the margin is between what a nation considers a hardened nuclear facility and what, in reality, is just a very expensive, very vulnerable hole in the ground. North Korea, a nation that prides itself on its deeply buried facilities, will surely note that underground depth alone no longer guarantees safety or invulnerability. Saudi Arabia, currently shopping around for Chinese reactors and eyeing its own nuclear ambitions, will now be asking some very serious questions about whether dispersing small modular reactors might be a far safer, more resilient strategy than building one big tempting mountain lab. Even South Korea, a staunch U.S. ally, has legislators who are now citing the Isfahan raid as they demand ironclad American security guarantees for any future domestic enrichment programs. This strike didn't just hit Iran, it just became a mandatory case study in every strategic studies program on Earth. It's a game changer. Behind closed doors, France privately called the raid necessary. Germany, ever the cautious diplomat, labeled it destabilizing. The United Kingdom, always urging a middle path, simply called on, quote, all sides to show restraint, which in diplomatic speak translates to a desperate plea of please don't drag us into this mess. But here's the most telling part. No one, absolutely no one at the UN Security Council table is drafting a condemnation resolution. Why? Because no major power wants to vote against either Washington or Jerusalem right now, not when Ukraine and Taiwan still desperately need friends and allies. The silence in this instance is deafening, and it is precisely the point. Iran's nuclear program has, for all intents and purposes, lost its diplomatic shield. Multilateral talks, once a frequent occurrence, are now completely off the menu until Tehran can somehow prove it can protect what it builds. I spoke with a former Israeli national security advisor, and he put it to me bluntly, without mincing words. We didn't buy a decade, we bought a budget cycle, 5 to 7 years. In Tel Aviv, that kind of horizon, that 5 to 7 year window, is more than enough time. It's enough to push ahead aggressively with their laser defense systems, finish deploying their advanced border sensors, and then crucially wait for internal Iranian ferment and discontent to do the rest of the work. Public reaction inside Israel is a mix of calm pride and a quiet sense of vindication. They've grown accustomed to these kinds of shadow wars, operations that rarely make the evening news. But this time, the success was simply too big, too undeniable to hide. So officials leaned in, plastering stark before and after satellite shots all over social media. The message, loud and clear to the folks back home, your small country just punched far, far above its weight, again. State TV in Iran, predictably, ran a looped segment of anti-aircraft guns firing into the dawn sky, a show of defiance, but notably, there were no actual images of the damage, nothing to confirm the extent of the destruction. Instead, anchors promised harsh revenge while admitting, almost as an aside, that some buildings were affected. That rhetorical downgrade from the usual fiery pronouncements of resistance to the almost dismissive affected buildings is the closest Tehran ever comes to an actual concession. The regime's biggest fear, believe it or not, isn't necessarily more bombs. Their deepest fear is the public realization, the widespread understanding that their most prized defensive asset, their supposedly impenetrable nuclear program, turned out to be nothing more than a death trap. Expect louder chants of death to Israel in the streets, but much, much quieter internal admissions that the program needs a hard, painful reset. Stories like this develop incredibly fast. If you want concise updates without all the usual media noise and spin, then subscribe and make sure you select notifications. The channel is free, and honestly, the analysis here goes deeper than most postgraduate seminars. You won't regret it. Pre-strike consensus among intelligence agencies and non-proliferation experts held that Iran could produce one bomb's worth of highly enriched uranium in a mere 5 to 6 months. Post-strike modeling, meticulously conducted by the Institute for Science and International Security, now pushes that timeline out significantly to 12 to 15 months, and that's assuming no hidden centrifuge halls exist, which is a big assumption. If Tehran tries to reconstitute its program in smaller, dispersed workshops, the timeline stretches even further, potentially to 2 years, simply because efficiency plummets when you can't chain thousands of machines together in a centralized facility. A year and a half might sound academic, like a detail for policy wonks, but it crosses a crucial U.S. election cycle and an Iranian parliamentary one. These are both moments when leaders, both in Washington and Tehran, prefer stability over more red lines and escalating crises. The timing of this setback is politically significant. The Gulf Cooperation States, the GCC, quietly cheered this development. They have, after all, been living under the shadow of Iranian missiles and regional aggression since 2019. Expect to see an acceleration of Saudi-Israeli intelligence sharing, more UAE purchases of advanced THAAD interceptors, and a renewed, concerted push for a comprehensive regional missile warning pact that effectively sidelines Tehran. Turkey, always the opportunist in the region, is already actively marketing its drones as proven anti-centrifuge tech, hoping to cash in on the prestige and perceived effectiveness of this strike. This raid didn't just cripple centrifuges, it completely reshuffled regional hierarchies and power dynamics in real time. The impact will be felt across the Middle East. Of course, nothing in this region is ever simple, and the biggest risk here is always overconfidence. If either Washington or Jerusalem starts to believe that the nuclear file is definitively closed, that Iran is no longer a threat, Iran could absolutely reconstitute its program in smaller, civilian-looking sites, making detection and targeting much, much harder. Another grave risk is environmental. Any future strike on an active reactor, rather than a workshop, would scatter real, dangerous fallout, flipping global opinion overnight and painting the attackers as villains. Finally, there's the logic of escalation. Iran might decide that detonating a crude device underground, a nuclear test, is the only way to restore its deterrence and regain face. That would cross a red line even Russia, Iran's ally, could not ignore, and it would plunge the world into a new, terrifying nuclear crisis. Ultimately, nuclear programs are political projects, not merely technical ones. Tehran wanted the bomb fundamentally to ensure regime survival, to project power and deter external threats. Last night's raid served as a brutal, undeniable reminder to the clerics that survival is anything but guaranteed. The West's goal, let's be clear, was never to erase knowledge. You can't exactly bomb physics textbooks out of existence. The goal was always to make the cost of pursuing a weapon higher, far higher than the perceived benefit.
And for the first time in 20 years, Iranian leaders are debating internally, genuinely questioning whether the bomb still offers them safety or if it's become an unbearable liability. When deterrence starts eating doubt inside the enemy's head, when they begin to question their core assumptions, you've already moved the football much farther down the field. So is Iran's nuclear program officially crippled? The centrifuge workshop is now just rubble. Fordow is venting uselessly, Natanz is hobbled, and those key scientists are looking for exit visas. Breakout time has doubled, the proxies are muted, unable to retaliate effectively, and their diplomatic cover is utterly gone. Call it crippled, call it a setback, call it whatever you like. Just please, for the love of all that's real, don't call it a theoretical threat anymore. The clock is still ticking, yes, but someone just stole the batteries and Tehran has no quick, easy way to get them back.